She said she could forget the rent, if I could make her smile. I never imagined how hard that would be, or how close it would bring us. The first day I moved in, the building already felt like it had a personality of its own, a quiet, slightly old-fashioned elegance that whispered of decades past. The hallway smelled faintly of jasmine and old books, a combination that was at once comforting and slightly mysterious. My suitcase clinked against the stair railing as I climbed, each step echoing softly, announcing my arrival to whoever might be watching. She was there when I opened the door to the lobby. The landlady. She had an air of effortless composure, the kind that made people pause for just a fraction of a second before speaking. She was not just older, her age carried a certain graceful weight, a life lived fully but with gentleness woven into her gestures. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and her eyes carried a warmth that softened the initial formality of her posture. I noticed how her hands, delicate but steady, arranged a small vase of flowers on the counter, brushing the petals with a tender attentiveness that seemed almost ritualistic. Her voice, calm and measured, startled me with its quiet warmth. "You must be the new tenant," she said, offering a small, polite smile. It was a smile that didn't try too hard, but it lingered in a way that made the air feel different, softer, more personal. I could hear a subtle note of curiosity behind her words, as if she were testing the waters to see how I would respond. As she went over the usual formalities, rent, rules, schedules, I noticed the small things that set her apart from anyone I had met before. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, the faint crease near her eyes when she smiled, the gentle rhythm of her movements that made the lobby feel almost like a quiet stage. And then, almost casually, she mentioned the rent. "It's due at the end of the month. But sometimes, well, let's just say, a smile goes a long way." She didn't elaborate, but the hint of playfulness in her eyes left a flicker of curiosity in me. There was something quietly magnetic about her presence. She didn't overwhelm the space with charm, nor did she demand attention, yet I found myself aware of every movement she made. Even the soft brush of her sleeve as she reached for a pen seemed to carry weight, like a subtle signal of the life she lived outside this lobby. That first meeting left me uneasy in a strange, pleasant way. Part of me wanted to retreat, overwhelmed by her confidence, yet another part of me wanted to linger, to learn the story behind the calmness and the smile that hinted at more than I could understand. She wasn't just a landlady, she was a presence that demanded attention quietly, and for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I was eager to stay, and see that smile again. The first few days in the apartment were a series of small, unremarkable interactions that somehow left a lasting impression. Every time I saw her in the hallway or lobby, there was a delicate rhythm to the way she moved, soft yet deliberate, like she was attuned to the world in a way I wasn't. Her presence was calming, though I never knew whether it was meant for me or simply the way she existed in her own space. One morning, I bumped into her in the narrow corridor leading to the laundry room. A stack of folded towels threatened to topple from her arms, and instinctively I stepped forward. Our hands brushed as we adjusted the pile together, the brief contact leaving a warmth I couldn't ignore. She gave me a small, almost mischievous smile, as if silently acknowledging that I had intruded upon her world, but in a way that invited connection rather than offense. The building itself seemed to mirror her quiet personality. Old wooden floors creaked underfoot, and sunlight filtered through slightly dusty windows, casting a golden haze over everything. She moved through these spaces with an ease that made the environment feel alive, as though the walls themselves leaned toward her presence. Every time she passed, I found myself acutely aware of the subtle details, the way her fingers lingered on the banister, the slight tilt of her head when she noticed me, the quiet chuckle that escaped her lips when I stumbled over a word or a step. Our conversations were brief but revealing. She asked questions that seemed casual but carried depth, about my work, my routines, even my favorite teas. Her curiosity was gentle, never prying, yet it carried a weight that made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. And when she laughed at something minor I said, it wasn't just a laugh, it was a soft, deliberate exhalation, warm and grounding, that made the narrow hallway feel broader, lighter. By the end of the week, I realized I was beginning to anticipate these small encounters. I found myself lingering a little longer in the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of the subtle expressions that seemed to tell a story I wasn't yet allowed to read fully. Even the way she adjusted a vase of flowers on the counter became a performance I watched with quiet fascination, the tilt of her wrist, the fleeting smile as a petal caught her attention, the gentle arch of her back as she leaned over the counter. She didn't need to speak grand words to draw me in, the smallest gestures, an almost imperceptible brush of her hand, the soft cadence of her voice, a fleeting glance that lingered too long, were enough to plant the seed of intrigue. And somewhere between the awkwardness of my fumbling greetings and the warmth of her subtle attentions, I began to understand that there was something rare here, a connection forming in the spaces between words, gestures, and the quiet rhythm of shared time. It was a rainy afternoon when the quiet of the building shifted, leaving a space that felt intimate in a way I hadn't experienced before. I had noticed that the hallway leading to the storage room often felt confining, the walls closing in with the scent of damp wood and the faint musk of rain-soaked concrete. She was already there, sorting through boxes of supplies that seemed heavier than they looked. "Let me help," I offered, though my hands felt clumsy and unsure in the confined space. She hesitated for a moment, giving me a quick, appraising glance, before a subtle nod allowed me into her world. As we lifted a box together, our fingers brushed accidentally, and a spark of warmth traveled from my hand into my arm. The brush was fleeting, almost insignificant, but in the quiet of the hallway, it felt electric. She adjusted her hold on the box, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was no need for words, the soft, steady gaze she gave me carried an unspoken acknowledgement, a shared understanding that neither of us could fully articulate yet. I became acutely aware of every detail, the way her shoulder brushed mine when we shifted the weight, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earthy aroma of rain, the way her hair fell just so across her forehead when she bent to lift another box. Time seemed to slow in that shared effort. The creak of the floorboards beneath our feet, the soft patter of rain against the windows, even the rustle of paper from the boxes, they all became part of the intimate rhythm we were creating without speaking. When one box slipped slightly, I steadied it with my hands hovering close to hers longer than necessary, and she looked at me with a smile that was at once amused and quietly vulnerable. There was a tension there, subtle but unmistakable, hovering in the air like charged electricity before a storm. Neither of us acknowledged it, but it was present in the way she lingered near me as we moved items, in the way her hand brushed against mine more than once, intentionally or not. I noticed my own heartbeat, thudding louder than the rain outside, as a quiet, compelling awareness settled over me. This was no longer a simple tenant-landlady interaction. By the time the boxes were stacked neatly in their corner, the hallway had transformed. It felt less like a narrow passage and more like a private space carved out for these quiet moments of shared effort. She straightened, a faint blush on her cheeks that caught the dim light just so, and offered a small, teasing remark about my fumbling technique. I laughed, feeling an unfamiliar closeness, a bridge built between us in the most mundane of chores. It was in that ordinary task that I realized something profound. Intimacy often lives in the smallest touches, in the briefest moments of shared space. And for the first time, I wondered how far that quiet connection could go. The first conversation that felt truly personal happened on a quiet evening, when the apartment building was drenched in the soft hum of distant traffic and occasional raindrops tapping against the windows. I had noticed her sitting in the lobby with a small stack of letters and a steaming cup of tea, her posture relaxed yet reflective, as if the world outside didn't quite reach her in that moment. "Do you ever feel like life just moves too fast sometimes?" she asked softly, her gaze lingering on the steam curling from her cup. The question was casual, but the subtle tremor in her voice suggested it carried more weight than she intended. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, before shrugging lightly, answering honestly, "Sometimes. I feel like I'm always running, but never really getting anywhere." Her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile, and she nodded in understanding. "Exactly. And sometimes, I forget to pause, to really notice what matters." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the small tremor of vulnerability in that simple gesture. There was something about the quiet strength in her admission that made the space between us feel charged, like we were no longer simply tenant and landlady, but two people sharing pieces of themselves in fragments. As we talked, the conversation drifted into small confessions, childhood memories, lost opportunities, the little routines that brought comfort. Each word seemed to create a bridge, connecting us in a way that was both fragile and profound. When she laughed at a minor anecdote I shared, it wasn't just a laugh, it was a gentle exhalation, warm and grounding, that seemed to fill the room with a soft light. At one point, she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine in a gesture so casual it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. The warmth of her presence pressed softly against me, and I became acutely aware of every detail, the subtle scent of her perfume, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her hand rested near mine on the edge of the table. We didn't speak of romance or desire, that would have been too soon, too bold. Yet in that quiet, lingering proximity, a silent tension settled over us, an unspoken understanding that we were both aware of something deeper forming. The vulnerability in her eyes, the careful way she shared herself, drew me in irresistibly. By the end of the evening, the lobby felt transformed. It was no longer just a transitional space, but a sanctuary, a private world where honesty, subtle touches, and quiet laughter created a fragile intimacy that neither of us wanted to break. In that moment, I realized that slow connections like this were rare, and that I wanted to explore every fragment of her world, one gentle, unhurried step at a time. It started as a casual remark, almost offhand, but it carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. She had been arranging flowers on the counter one late afternoon when I walked in, tired from the day but drawn to the gentle warmth of the lobby. She glanced up, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and said softly, "You know, maybe I could forget the rent. But only if you can make me smile." Her words were light, teasing, but they struck me in a way that made my chest tighten slightly. There was no challenge like this in my life before, no playful demand that held so much meaning in a few simple syllables. I felt a sudden urge to rise to it, not for the rent, not even for her, but for the rare feeling of being able to truly reach someone in that quiet, unspoken way. I started small, noticing what made her laugh or relax. A clumsy attempt at arranging the vases, a light joke about the weather, even mimicking her meticulous hand movements while dusting a shelf, each act became a subtle game between us. When my hand brushed hers accidentally while handing over a stray flower, the brief contact sent warmth up my arm, and she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered just slightly, and I noticed a flicker of amusement in her eyes. We began sharing these moments in small, private spaces, the narrow hallway, the lobby by the window, even the staircase where the light caught her hair just so. She would tilt her head, watch me carefully, and sometimes her laughter would come softly, almost shyly, but enough to make the air around us feel lighter. The tension between us was no longer merely quiet, it was charged with playful intimacy, teasing glances and half-smiles that lingered longer than necessary. One evening, while I attempted a particularly clumsy flower arrangement, she laughed so genuinely that her hand reached out to steady a vase, and touched mine in the process. It was a fleeting contact, but it felt deliberate in the way it grounded both of us. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers, and the rhythm of her gentle laugh made my heart feel unusually full. By the time I left that day, I realized the rent for smile challenge wasn't about money at all. It was about connection, the slow, delicate weaving of trust, humor, and intimacy. Each smile I earned, each laugh shared, pulled us closer in ways neither of us dared to speak aloud. And for the first time, I understood that small gestures could carry more weight than grand declarations, that playful moments could reveal depths of feeling previously unspoken. In that playful, teasing rhythm, our bond deepened, not rushed, not obvious, but quietly undeniable. The tension between us had been quietly building for weeks, threaded through fleeting touches, teasing smiles, and shared laughter. That evening, it finally reached a point where the air between us felt charged, like a delicate current waiting for a spark. I had been helping her move a stack of heavier boxes from one corner of the lobby to the storage area. The hallway was dimly lit, the golden glow of the overhead lights reflecting off the polished wood floors, making every movement feel intimate, almost cinematic. One box slipped unexpectedly, and I lunged to steady it, my hands brushing against hers as we both reached for it. The contact was brief, but the warmth of her skin against mine lingered far longer than it should have. Her fingers rested lightly on the box, but I felt the subtle pulse of her energy, the quiet acknowledgement of our closeness, vibrating in the space between us. For a moment, our eyes met, and the hallway felt smaller, the world outside irrelevant. Her gaze held something unspoken, something both teasing and vulnerable, and I realized how acutely aware I had become of every detail about her. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy aroma of the boxes and old wood, creating a strangely comforting atmosphere that made my chest tighten. She leaned back slightly, but not enough to break the proximity. Her shoulder brushed mine again as she shifted her weight, and I noticed the warmth radiating from her. The soft rustle of her clothing, the slight tremor of her fingers, the way her hair fell into her eyes, all of it was amplified in that charged silence. Neither of us spoke, yet the air was heavy with the words we didn't say. A laugh escaped her, light and uncertain, breaking the tension just enough to make the moment feel real rather than overwhelming. I felt the echo of her amusement ripple through me, a gentle reminder that intimacy didn't always have to be declared, it could exist quietly, in touches, glances, and shared space. We moved the final box together, our hands lingering near each other longer than necessary, and when we finally stepped back, the hallway seemed to stretch around us, empty but alive with the electric tension of what had just passed. She tilted her head, a teasing smile playing on her lips, and I felt both exhilaration and hesitation, aware of the depth of connection growing between us, but unsure of when or how to cross the next line. It was a turning point. A simple accident, a shared task, and yet it carried the weight of all the unspoken feelings between us. For the first time, I understood that closeness could be felt without a word, that desire could exist quietly, respectfully, in the soft press of a hand, the fleeting brush of skin, and the gaze that refused to look away. After the quiet tension of the previous weeks, the building felt different that evening. The fading golden light from the windows softened every corner of the lobby, casting long, gentle shadows that seemed to cradle us in their warmth. It was a rare moment of peace, where the world outside ceased to matter and the only thing that existed was the shared space between us. She was arranging flowers again, her hands moving with the same quiet care I had come to notice, but this time there was a subtle relaxation in her movements, a softness in her expression that suggested trust. I offered to help, and she gave a small nod, a gesture that felt like an invitation, a permission to step closer not just physically but emotionally. As I reached for a vase, our hands met deliberately this time. Her fingers lingered near mine, the warmth familiar and comforting. The brief contact sent a quiet thrill through me, but it was not tension, it was connection, steady and mutual. We worked together in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft clink of ceramic and the rustle of leaves from the bouquet. I noticed the faint exhale of her breath as she adjusted a bloom, and the subtle brush of her shoulder against mine as we leaned toward the same table. In that calm, ordinary task, there was an extraordinary intimacy. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened when she smiled, the gentle touch of her hand, was amplified in the quiet evening light. Finally, she stepped back, studying the arrangement with a contented smile. "You've done well," she said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and pride. I smiled, and she mirrored it effortlessly. It wasn't playful teasing this time, it was something deeper, something that acknowledged the connection we had built over weeks of shared moments, laughter, and subtle touches. Then, in a gesture that felt both natural and intimate, she rested her chin lightly on my shoulder. The warmth of her presence, the quiet steadiness of her breath, and the subtle pulse of life through her body pressed softly against mine. I felt a profound sense of closeness, an understanding that this wasn't just friendship or convenience, but a rare and delicate bond. The world outside the lobby no longer mattered, there was only the quiet comfort of being together, hand near hand, presence near presence. As the evening light faded completely, we lingered there, side by side, sharing smiles and small, unspoken words. The playful challenge of forgetting the rent had become a symbol of everything we had built, trust, warmth, and a slow-burn intimacy that neither of us rushed, yet both felt deeply. In that moment, I realized that connection could be quiet, gentle, and profoundly satisfying. And for the first time in a long time, I felt entirely at home. If this quiet, slow-burn connection moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, so you can follow every smile, every glance, and every heartbeat in our journey of unexpected romance.